Feng Jiang and Yin Xueshan had been together for 3 years, but this was the first time he openly parked his car in front of her cafe and walked in holding a large bouquet of flowers. Yin Xueshan was busy behind the counter. She looked up, smiled at him, her expression both affectionate and teasing. He didn't say anything either, just smiled back, his gaze gentle and warm. Red roses, beautiful and fragrant as they were, had long become a cliché. Like many things, they failed to convey much meaning. Still, how fragrant. Yin Xueshan took a deep breath. Just as she took the bouquet, his smile faded. He gestured towards the window with a quick nod and swiftly ducked into the back room, as nimble as a mouse avoiding a cat. With that reaction, Yin Xueshan didn't even need to turn around to know. It was her mother, Wan Jimei. Wan Jimei, now 60, had retired 6 months ago after selling off her last shop. From that day onward, Yin Xueshan felt as though a heavy burden had been placed on her head. Wan Jimei always wore light makeup and was a regular at yoga studios and beauty salons. Her short hair was impeccably styled, with every strand seemingly in its rightful place. She stood at an imposing 172 centimeters tall. Once curvaceous in her youth, her now slender frame exuded a refined elegance, reminiscent of the graceful resilience of bamboo and plum blossoms. Her simple, sophisticated attire further emphasized her effortless, commanding presence. Yin Xueshan's cafe was named Azure and Blue, derived from the saying, "Blue surpasses azure," born from it, implying generational improvement. It was a name chosen by Wan Jimei, not out of confidence or self-importance, but simply from a mother's wish for her daughter to live a better life. As she entered, Wan Jimei's sharp eyes scanned the room. Her voice, though soft, carried a distinct pressure. "So few customers, sitting here with 1 cup of coffee for hours. Aren't you worried?" Clearly, she wasn't in a great mood. Yin Xueshan kept her head down, trimming flower stems, avoiding eye contact. "I know what I'm doing, Mom. Don't worry about it," she replied softly. Wan Jimei frowned immediately. "You know what you're doing? Really? Can I stop worrying?" Yin Xueshan didn't respond. She kept her head lowered, continuing to arrange the flowers. But a careless move led to her finger being pricked by a thorn, drawing blood. Seeing this, Wan Jimei's tone softened slightly, though her words remained firm. "Your brother needs money for a new home. With other expenses, there's still a shortfall of 200,000 yuan. I'm tight on funds lately. Can you think of a way to help?" Yin Xueshan was an only child, so the brother in question was her cousin on her mother's side. When she didn't respond, Wan Jimei's tone grew heavier. "You're both only children. You should treat each other like real siblings. Don't be so calculating." "I'm not being calculating." Yin Xueshan steadied her emotions. Her voice remained soft, but her weariness and frustration were evident. "Uncle's family has treated us well, but we've done just as much. They've lived in our property for over 10 years, and we've even covered the maintenance fees. Who's been handling Grandma and Grandpa's pensions? The holiday bonuses and allowances we've given them, let's not even count those. But now, 200,000 yuan just like that? Do they think money grows on trees?" "That's enough." Wan Jimei raised her voice, scolding her. "If you don't want to lend it, fine. Why bring up all this nonsense? Do you think I'm really out of money? Let me tell you, I'm not at the point where I need your lectures." Yin Xueshan's face flushed. Nearby, a few customers began glancing their way. Wan Jimei's voice lowered slightly, but she didn't make any effort to keep her words private. Instead, she seemed intent on being overheard. "Do you think I'm doing this for myself? I won't live forever, you know. When I'm gone, your brother will be your closest family. I want him to remember your kindness and keep that bond strong. Otherwise, if you keep acting like this, how can I rest easy?" Yin Xueshan could tell where this conversation was heading. Her head began to ache. Helplessly, she tugged at her mother's sleeve, pleading, "Mom, can you not say this anymore? I'm fine, really. Fine." Wan Jimei's expression darkened. "How long do you plan to muddle along with that man? What you're doing isn't illegal or immoral, but it's neither open nor honest either. You too. Before she could finish, she turned and spotted that man standing at the door, looking awkward and concerned. Yin Shueshan lowered her head, continuing to trim the flowers. Her heart ached with frustration and a sense of injustice. Her eyes reddened, tears welling up. She blinked repeatedly, trying to force them back. After all, what good was crying? She wouldn't cry. Not her. Wanjime knew well that her mindset had changed after retirement. It was as if the wide road she had been walking suddenly narrowed into a winding path. Her daughter and Feng Jiang had been in an ambiguous relationship for 3 years.
How could she not know?
She was just pretending not to. But Wanjime didn't approve of Feng Jiang. There was no way she could approve. No matter how many good qualities he had, a single flaw could cancel them all out. Thinking about it, she often felt waves of regret, but she couldn't quite pinpoint what she regretted. After all, no one had really done anything wrong. Time rewound to the 1980s, to the open-air stalls of Chonglu Street. At not quite 20 years old, Wanjime worked as a vendor for Brother Jun. Everyone said Brother Jun had a good eye for goods and was willing to invest, and no matter if it was jeans, floral shirts, or oversized sunglasses, they sold themselves when Wanjime wore them. Wanjime was a diligent and honest worker. Whenever Brother Jun went out to restock, no matter how many days he was gone, she ran the stall with exceptional care, even more dedicated than when he was around. Some people whispered that she was a fool. Back then, stealing merchandise or skimming money wasn't difficult, let alone slacking off. Wanjime hadn't had much education and couldn't explain her values with big words. She simply felt that since Brother Jun trusted her and paid her well, she couldn't betray him. Brother Jun's full name was Feng Jun. From selling scarves hidden in his coat, earning him the labels of hooligan and drifter, he had clawed his way up on Chonglu Street, known as a generous and upright man. Wanjime had an older brother and a younger sister. In those days, the elder brother was seen as the pillar of the family, the youngest sister basked in indulgence, and Jime, the middle child, was the one often overlooked. She left early and came home late every day, her cheeks sunburned in summer, her hands chapped in winter. She contributed her earnings to the household, helped her brother get married, and paid for her younger sister's tuition and living expenses at technical school. At last, she gained some recognition in the family. She earned a lot but never managed to save any personal funds. During those years, Chonglu Street's business was booming. Stalls were crammed tightly together, and disputes over territory, price wars, and fights for customers were daily occurrences. Quarrels and brawls were nothing out of the ordinary. One snowy day, Brother Jun arrived to find a newcomer. A burly man had taken over half his stall. By the time Wanjime got there, the two men were already fighting. Feng Jun was on the losing end, blood staining the snow, though it wasn't clear whose it was. Wanjime was carrying a cloth bag, heavy with her packed food and drink for the day. Pushing her way forward, she wrapped the bag strap around her wrist and began swinging it wildly at the intruder. The man was caught off guard and shielded his head, giving Feng Jun the chance to get back on his feet. "Get back," he shouted at her. His words fell on deaf ears. She only knew that if she didn't help, Brother Jun would be beaten to a pulp. With the New Year's stock already on hand, what would they do then? So, she kept swinging, kicking, and shouting, turning the brawl into a chaotic free-for-all. Fortunately, a few of Feng Jun's regular allies arrived and quickly rolled up their sleeves. The newcomer admitted defeat and slunk away. Years later, Wanjime couldn't recall the details of that day. She only remembered her cloth bag falling to the ground, her aluminum lunchbox spilling its contents, cabbage and potato stew, onto the dirty snow. It smelled pretty good, despite the mess. She looked rather disheveled, her padded coat dirty, and one of her corduroy boots coming apart at the seams. From the neighboring stall, Fatty Wu grinned as he eyed her up and down. Clicking his tongue, he said, "Jime, why don't you work for me? Whatever Brother Jun's paying you, I'll double it." Wanjime ignored him. focusing on her work. Foam June shot a glare at Fatty Wu and barked, "Scram." The winter sun rose, not hot but warm enough to be comforting. Chonglu Street grew lively again, and after the commotion, the day's business officially began. Foam June disappeared for a while and returned with a new pair of padded shoes. Without a word, he dropped them at Wang Jimei's feet and walked away. Fatty Wu clicked his tongue again, too absorbed in teasing to notice his customers calling for him. After spending some time on Chonglu Street, Wang Jimei grew dissatisfied with merely helping Brother June sell goods. She wanted her own stall. But space was limited, and after observing discreetly for a long while, she still found no opportunity. Eventually, she decided to ask Brother June for help. One freezing afternoon, with few customers around, Wang Jimei shared her thoughts. Brother June squinted into the distance, staying silent for a long time before finally asking, "What do you want to sell?" Wang Jimei hadn't decided yet, but at the time, almost anything sold well on Chonglu Street. Brother June said nothing further. After finishing his cigarette, he wandered off. When he returned, he didn't mention the conversation again, as though it had slipped his mind. A few days later, he suddenly said to Wang Jimei, "I've asked around, but there's no way to squeeze you in right now. So, here's the deal. I'll make some room for you." He gestured across the stall, slicing the air like cutting a cake. "If you're serious about doing business, act fast. Chonglu Street won't stay this prosperous forever." He was right. At the time, rapid commercial development meant that Chonglu Street's marketplace was heading toward obsolescence. After some thought, Wang Jimei nodded decisively. Not long after, she set up a small stall the size of a school desk next to Brother June's, selling women's lingerie. Prominently displayed were lacy white bras and flirtatious underwear, elegant yet bold compared to the practical and simple goods sold at neighboring stalls. Despite the higher prices and flashier styles, Wang Jimei's business thrived. Brother June didn't charge her rent. "No need for that," he said. "The new salespeople I hired are inexperienced. When I'm not around, I'll need you to keep an eye on things." Then, with a laugh, he added, "If I had a little sister, she'd probably be just like you." Warmth filled Wang Jimei's heart. She didn't know how to respond, so she simply smiled. That's likely when the rumors began. For years, Brother June had fiercely protected his territory, yet now he had casually given part of it to Wang Jimei. People connected this act with the snowy day she had fiercely defended him. Speculations grew, embellished over time until the stories became vivid and detailed. Some vendors, emboldened by alcohol or a mischievous mood, made their crude remarks. "Slept with her yet? How many times?" they'd ask Brother June. Normally reserved and not one for arguments, Brother June's response was to glare, his expression threatening to erupt. Wang Jimei, meanwhile, worked tirelessly, brushing off the gossip as harmless jokes. She believed in letting actions speak for themselves. But as Brother June had foreseen, business on Chonglu Street gradually waned. Spotting the trend early, he became anxious and uncertain. By then, Brother June had been married for 4 years. His wife, Ai-ing, worked at a state-owned store, and their son, Yang, had just turned 1. His restlessness puzzled and frustrated Ai-ing. One day, she took time to visit Chonglu Street and immediately felt a pang of unease. She saw Wang Jimei at her lingerie stall, swamped with customers. Those bras and panties were undeniably appealing, displayed day after day in front of her husband. The more Ai-ing thought about it, the more it consumed her, almost driving her to madness. That evening, when Brother June came home, he walked into the sound of smashing dishes. Cups and plates littered the floor in shards, while Yang wailed behind a closed door, pounding on it with tiny fists. Brother June had long worried that the rumors would reach Ai-ing's ears, and now the day had come. Scooping up his son, he looked at his fuming wife and calmly asked, "Is there anything to eat? I'm hungry." Ai-ing responded with a swift kick, sparking another round of Yang's wailing. "You want food? Go eat crap," she screamed. Instead of getting angry, Brother Jun laughed. "Bring it on. Let's eat it together," he retorted. AI burst into tears, but her sobs took on a softer, almost melodic tone. She struck him weakly, seeking an explanation or reassurance, though her words felt powerless. From that day forward, arguments like this became a staple of their household for the next decade, and the name, Wanjime, became an ever-present specter within their walls. During rare moments of peace, Brother Jun would tell AI, "There are plenty of beautiful women, not just Wanjime. If I were up to no good, you wouldn't be able to stop me anyway. So, why not relax and enjoy life? I make money for you to spend." AI understood this logic, but in the minutiae of daily life, she couldn't stop herself from feeling suspicious and agitated. As the years went by, Brother Jun's patience wore thin. Their endless cycles of fights and reconciliations drained them, leaving behind exhaustion and indifference. Wanjime's first trip to the south for purchasing goods was alongside Feng Jun. It was also her first time enduring such a long journey on a hard-seat train, packed with people speaking different dialects. The air was thick with a mix of sweat, tobacco, food, and body odor, a cacophony of smells. By the time her feet were firmly on the ground, she still felt as though she were floating. During the day, she and Feng Jun split up to find suppliers. Being directionally challenged, she got lost on her first outing. Not only did she fail to secure any goods, but she also almost didn't find her way back. It was well past dark when she finally made it back to the hotel, following directions from kind strangers. At the entrance, she saw Feng Jun scanning the surroundings, and relief washed over her. She almost cried. Feng Jun spotted her and turned back into the hotel without a word of consolation. That night, there was a loud knock on her door. She got up to open it, and there he was, not stepping inside, but handing her a bunch of bananas. "You'll get used to it after a few more trips," he said curtly before walking away. Years later, over 50, Wanjime was lounging on the beach with her daughter, soaking in the sun as they reminisced about this trip. "That was the first time I ever ate a banana. It was so sweet, I could have cried in the middle of the night," she said with a bright laugh. "Back then, I told myself, when I've made enough money, every time I go out for supplies, I'll buy a huge bunch of bananas just for me." Shueshan looked at her curiously before blurting out, "Mom, did you ever have feelings for Uncle Jun? Be honest." "He's not good-looking, always scowling like a piece of charcoal, stubborn as a mule. What's there to like?" Wanjime laughed openly, her expression clear and unguarded. She gazed into the distance as though glimpsing her younger self. "I was a mess back then, too. My face was always grimy, my eyes crusted with sleep in the mornings. Life was hard. I only had the energy to think about making money, nothing else. My dad was good-looking, though. And how did that turn out?" Shueshan teased, hitting a nerve. Just as she was about to press further, she noticed her mother pulling her straw hat over her face, signaling the end of the conversation. Indeed, Wanjime didn't want to dwell on old, irrelevant stories. But time has a way of erasing some memories while carving others into permanence, leaving little room for choice. In the spring and summer that year, Wanjime's business thrived. One morning, as soon as she set up her stall, AI stormed over. During Wanjime's trips to buy goods, Feng Jun had also been absent from home, leading AI to suspect they were together. Grabbing handfuls of bras and panties, AI threw them to the ground, yelling furiously, "You shameless vixen." Wanjime said nothing, silently picking up the scattered lingerie. For the small stretch of stall space she occupied, she had to endure it. From the neighboring stall, Fatty Wu chimed in, "Come on, Jime. If you've done something wrong, just apologize. We're all family, right?" Wanjime grabbed a pair of jeans and hurled them at his head. The jeans were heavy, and years of hauling goods had strengthened her arms. Fatty Wu yelped in pain and fell silent. Even AI was momentarily stunned. She realized that when it came to fighting, she was no match for Wanjime. Even in a shouting match, her voice might fall short. As Ai-ing hesitated, Wanjime swiftly picked up the lingerie from the ground. Dusting them off, she raised them high and called out to the onlookers, "Discount sale. Everything must go." Immediately, a crowd surged forward, separating Wanjime and Ai-ing. To Ai-ing, Wanjime's attitude seemed less like retreat and more like disregard. Reflecting on her actions later, Ai-ing felt she must have been blinded by anger to have done something so humiliating and self-defeating. 2 days later, Feng Jun reappeared on Changlu Street, striding confidently despite his unkempt hair and stubbly face, a man who had clearly been on the road. "I was out transporting goods with some friends," he explained. From that point on, Feng Jun spent less and less time on Changlu Street. With Wanjime managing things so competently, he felt reassured leaving his business in her hands. Some bonds of trust and reliance surpass even blood ties. Though neither of them ever voiced it, they both understood and found the sentiment too sentimental, too cloying to put into words. As a young woman, Wanjime looked down on Ai-ing to some degree. Confident that she had never crossed any lines, she carried herself with pride and dignity. It wasn't until many years later, after becoming a wife and mother herself, gaining both age and experience, that she began to understand and even feel some guilt towards Ai-ing. Not long after, Feng Jun left Changlu Street entirely, buying 2 trucks to start a transportation business. Later, he moved into construction materials, dealing in rebar and cement, and built his own logistics network. He left early and returned late, rarely speaking about business at home. His presence in the family seemed to boil down to one thing: providing money. During those years, Ai-ing secretly investigated him and even followed him herself, her suspicions and anxieties unrelenting. Every minor incident sent her spiraling into unease. Ai-ing often thought of Wanjime, even dreaming of her repeatedly. That intelligent, beautiful, brave, and independent woman seemed to have taken root in her home, growing into an unshakable tree. Sometimes Ai-ing thought, even if Feng Jun remained faithful, even if he harbored feelings for someone in his heart, it would undoubtedly be Wanjime. But these thoughts masked a deeper truth. Ai-ing wasn't just questioning her marriage, she was also envying and resenting Wanjime for her independence, confidence, and freedom. In an attempt to provoke a reaction, Ai-ing would deliberately bring up Wanjime in Feng Jun's presence. She was the one who primarily argued, often crying and yelling until her voice was hoarse, while Feng Jun responded with silence. He would leave the house, as if diving into the sea, leaving Ai-ing alone on the shore to process her emotions. But she couldn't. Instead, her sorrow, anger, and helplessness festered within her, trapping her in self-doubt and insecurity. Sometimes, she would wander through the marketplace and inevitably find herself near Wanjime's stall. Seeing her thriving, full of energy, only stoked her frustration. In the early 1990s, Wanjime moved into a new shopping mall, eager to expand her business. She stocked up on a large inventory, determined to succeed. However, the market evolved quickly. Her first batch of goods, still unsold, was rendered outdated by competitors' new styles. Clenching her teeth, she ordered another batch, yet the downward trend persisted. As if that weren't enough, one day, she opened a package from a supplier to find over 100 defective dresses, all in the smallest size. When she called to complain, the other end hung up before she could finish, and subsequent calls went unanswered. Dust piled up on her inventory as she struggled to clear stock and recover costs. She wore the unsold dresses herself, pairing them with high heels, standing at her stall with a bold, inviting smile, practically pulling customers into her shop. By the end of each day, her body felt broken into 8 pieces. It was the most mentally taxing and financially strained period of her life. At the same time, her parents began pressuring her to marry. Whenever she returned home for meals, her brother and sister-in-law would wear sour faces, while her younger sister, now working at a post office after graduating from technical school, spoke airily of market economies and fashion culture, casually remarking, "Second sister, you should read more and develop a better sense of aesthetics." Sitting among her family, Won Jime felt an icy chill creep into her heart. She grew frightened and considered giving up. She wrote out a store transfer ad on a piece of cardboard, hung it up, then took it down, only to hang it up again after steeling herself. A few days later, Fong Jun suddenly appeared. He didn't mention how he'd learned of her troubles. Like an ordinary customer, he examined her goods before saying succinctly, "Order another batch. I'll lend you the money. If you make a profit, pay me back. If you don't, the store's mine. Deal?" Seeing her hesitation, he added, "If the store ends up mine, I'll hire you as a clerk. We'll start over, just like on Chonglu Street." His words struck a chord with Won Jime. Like before, she took a deep breath and decisively replied, "Deal." It was with that batch of goods that she turned her luck around. When Won Jime went to repay Fong Jun, he was squatting on the ground, fiddling with a broken car part, his hands smeared with black grease. Without looking up, he pointed to a drawer and told her to toss the money in there. "No need to thank me," he said casually. "You've sacrificed so much for your siblings. Did they ever thank you?" Won Jime didn't reply. Her throat felt tight, and she turned away, pretending to study a map pinned to the wall. In the following years, Won Jime's business flourished. She left home before dawn every day. While spring and summer mornings were manageable, the cold of autumn and winter was harsh. Outside the mall, a mass of people would gather in the dim light, waiting for the gates to open. As the doors creaked apart, light poured out, and the crowd surged forward, exhaling clouds of white breath into the frosty air. At 30, Won Jime married In Jianghe, a factory accountant. In Jianghe was educated and mild-mannered, qualities that complemented Won Jime's own regrets about her upbringing and stood in stark contrast to the street-smart demeanor of the Chonglu vendors she'd known. As a child, In Shueshan often spent time in her mother's boutique. When she looked back on those days as an adult, her memories were tinged with the mingled sense of fabric, plastic, and leather, a sour, ticklish smell that was difficult to describe. Years later, when Fong Jun fell ill and was hospitalized, Won Jime visited him, tucking a thick envelope of cash under his pillow. When he started to refuse, she frowned. "It's just a little money. You're getting more petty with age." As she spoke, the hospital room door opened and Fong Jiang, fresh from finishing his college entrance exams, walked in carrying a thermos. His expression was cold. Fong Jun urged him to address Won Jime as Aunt May, repeating himself several times, but the boy didn't respond. At the time, no one could have predicted the entanglements that would arise between Fong Jiang and Won Jime's daughter, In Shueshan. That same year, Fong Jiang helped his mother, Ai-ing, start and run an auto accessories store. To Ai-ing, he was her son. He had always been mature beyond his years, managing his own affairs and mediating between his parents, bringing sweetness to their often tense household. From that year on, Ai-ing truly moved past her bitterness and began to reflect on her life and marriage with fresh eyes. Her son's financial support required her to devote herself entirely to the business, leaving no time for petty concerns. Her social circle expanded, her horizons broadened, and her outlook grew confident and optimistic. By middle age, Ai-ing had become someone she genuinely admired. However, one worry remained. At 25, Fong Jiang declared himself a staunch non-believer in marriage. Over the years, he hadn't brought home a single girlfriend. Ai-ing worried endlessly, sometimes about his physical and mental health, other times about his orientation. Fong Jiang had moved out to live alone after starting work. He was financially independent, receiving separate salaries from both his own job and the family business he helped with. With his father's composed demeanor, his mother's good looks, and a sharp sense of style, his home was tidy, minimalist, and refined, neither feminine nor effeminate. Eventually, Ai-ing left the matter to Fong Jun, urging him to talk to their son. Foam Jun, ever direct, asked bluntly, "Your mom's worried about you. What's with this no marriage, no dating thing?" Foam Jiang countered, "Dad, do you think marriage is meaningful?" Foam Jun glared, "If it's not, how do you think you're here?" Foam Jiang smiled faintly and ended the conversation with silence. Life was complicated, he thought. For all the ups and downs his parents had faced, they might indeed feel happy, that happiness belonged to them, something only they could judge. As their child, he had his own perspective. Growing up was hard, being responsible was exhausting. He didn't want to get married or live the kind of life they did. And he feared raising a child who might have to walk the same arduous path he had. At the start of the millennium, the factory where Yin Jianghe worked finally shut down after years of struggling to survive. Not long after, with Wang Jimei's support, he opened a pharmacy. 4 years later, Wang Jimei turned 40. It was a year filled with upheaval. The rapid development of the new district brought towering skyscrapers and modern shopping malls, their bright lights and polished facades making the Chonglu Street commercial city look shabby and outdated. Wang Jimei's business began to decline. Decisive as always, she sold her 2 boutique shops at a good price and started planning her next move. One day, while wandering around town, she passed a jewelry store owned by an acquaintance. The owner invited her for a chat in the manager's office. When she came out, she saw Yin Jianghe standing at the counter with an unfamiliar woman. Wang Jimei didn't approach them. She watched quietly as the woman wrapped her arms around his waist, laughing coquettishly and brushing her chest against his arm. When she got home, Wang Jimei calmly took stock of her finances. She also made a visit to the hospital and came back with a gynecological diagnosis. After that, she and Yin Jianghe began living separately. Every day, she threw herself into the stock exchange with the enthusiasm of going to work. During this time, only Yin Xueshan ever heard her quiet sobs. Only her daughter saw her lonely yet proud silhouette, or knew about the sleepless nights when she lay with her eyes tightly shut but unable to rest. And only Yin Xueshan, looking up at her with concern, repeatedly called out, "Mom?
Mom."
2 months later, Wang Jimei asked Yin Jianghe for a divorce. As for her savings, she claimed her bank account was nearly empty, having lost it all in the stock market. Yin Jianghe was shocked and demanded an explanation, to which Wang Jimei responded with cold calm. "It's my money. I can spend it however I want. Even the pharmacy was funded with my money and connections. Be grateful I'm not auditing your accounts." Their marriage completely unraveled. Yin Jianghe hurled insults, calling her a slut, a shrew from Chonglu Street, and even accusing her of being Feng Jun's mistress. Enraged, Wang Jimei, trembling, grabbed a thermos from the table and hurled it at him. Scenes like this played out repeatedly. Whenever Yin Xueshan was home, she would rush to protect her mother. But as soon as she appeared, Wang Jimei would fall silent. She would crouch down, hug her daughter, and smile at her, ignoring Yin Jianghe's shouting and cursing. Yin Xueshan would whisper into her mother's ear, "Dad's wrong. I love you, Mom." Her daughter's clear, bright eyes, full of fear and worry, melted Wang Jimei's heart and filled her with both tenderness and pain. Time passed, filled with quarrels, insults, and cold wars. One refused to forgive, the other refused to leave. Until one night, Yin Jianghe and his mistress were startled awake by a frantic knocking at the door of their rented apartment. 10-year-old Yin Xueshan had taken a 3-hour bus ride alone to their hometown to fetch her grandmother. Now, the two of them stood at the door, straight-backed and unyielding. That night, Yin Jianghe slapped his daughter hard across the face and shouted, "Did your mother put you up to this?" Yin Xueshan's ears buzzed. Staring at her father's bloodshot eyes, she was too scared to cry, her breath caught in her throat. Her grandmother shielded her fiercely, yelling, "Are you trying to beat her to death? Why don't you kill me first?" The old woman didn't mince words. She reminded him that without Wang Jimei's hard work and early mornings, there wouldn't even be a pharmacy for him to run. "You're just an unemployed worker. What makes you think you're a boss? She laid it out plainly. Either move on from the past and continue together, or part ways cleanly. Anything else was just disgraceful and damaging to everyone involved. After much turmoil, Won Ji-mei and In Jang-ha finally divorced. From that day on, In Jang-ha never returned to see his daughter. Not even once. Even In Shueshan's grandmother cut ties with Won Ji-mei and her daughter, accusing her former daughter-in-law. Yes, In Jang-ha was wrong, but you shouldn't have let your daughter do something like that. She's just a child. Tears streamed down Won Ji-mei's face. She was heartbroken and aggrieved. How could anyone think she would send her daughter to do such a thing? Her daughter had left the house with her school bag, saying she was going to visit her grandmother. Since her mother-in-law lived nearby, Won Ji-mei hadn't questioned it. Years later, Won Ji-mei asked her daughter repeatedly, "Why did you go all the way to get grandma? Weren't you scared to travel alone for so long?" In Shueshan would shake her head. She remembered how she had secretly been selling hair clips and lace socks to her classmates, a side hustle that had drawn warnings from her teachers about calling her parents in. Many events in life are interconnected in unseen ways. It was likely the fear of her parents being called in that drove her to bring her grandmother to intervene. Won Ji-mei also asked, "How did you know where your dad was staying?" The first time In Shueshan answered, she stammered. Later, her response became smooth. "The pharmacy staff told me." But when pressed about which staff member, her answer was always the same. "I forgot." The truth was, those scenes and voices remained like needles in her memory, a stone weighing on her chest. She had never forgotten. After finalizing her divorce, Won Ji-mei quickly moved to a new home with her daughter. The young In Shueshan was both delighted and worried, secretly asking, "Do we still have money?" Won Ji-mei's eyes crinkled with a confident smile. "We do." She never returned to the stock exchange. Initially, moving was simply meant to be a fresh start, but the process of house hunting and buying revealed an unexpected opportunity. Won Ji-mei began studying real estate projects, analyzing building designs, prices, and surrounding areas. She swiftly purchased 3 residential properties, 2 storefronts, and, despite others calling her crazy, paid a high price for ownership of 2 old, dilapidated apartments. By the time In Jang-ha heard about it and angrily confronted her, accusing her of faking her stock losses or never having risked the market at all, the deals were already done. In Shueshan's memories, Won Ji-mei was the mother who laughed loudly with friends, sang pop songs with her daughter in the car, and constantly broke her diet to fit into a pretty dress. She was also the mother who lied to teachers so she could take her daughter to watch variety show recordings. By the time Won Ji-mei turned 50 and In Shueshan was 20, property prices had multiplied several times over. While attending college, In Shueshan worked part-time at a design studio run by her senior. After graduation, Won Ji-mei handed her one of the storefronts, and it became the Azure and Blue Cafe. The following year, her senior studio expanded, and In Shueshan became a partner. Growing up on Chonglu Street had taught her worldly wisdom at a young age. Her mother's life lessons and financial resources had paved the way for her success. More educated than her mother, she was also more confident and self-assured. Witnessing her mother's hard work instilled in her a deep respect for life. She was brave but not boastful. It was during a bid for an outsourcing project that In Shueshan met Feng Jiang. At first, she knew nothing about him. But Feng Jiang, being 8 years older, quickly pieced together who she was after a little probing. No one but Feng Jiang himself knew that, as a teenager, he had once walked to Chonglu Street Commercial City. It was a morning after his father had stormed out, his mother had cried all night, and his home felt hollow with his father's prolonged absence. He wanted to see the infamous Won Ji-mei, to see if she was working as usual or, as his mother claimed, hiding somewhere in secret rendezvous with Feng Jun. In Feng Jiang's eyes, Won Ji-mei was always smiling, though sometimes the smiles were exaggerated, full of the shrewdness of a seasoned businesswoman. She was perpetually busy, her hands never idle as she attended to customers, organized inventory, and calculated accounts. She seemed powered by an invisible engine running at high speed. He also noticed little Yin Shueshan sitting quietly at a table with her big, observant eyes. Once, he saw her struggling to open a jelly cup with her teeth. Another time, she wore a pink padded jacket, flushed with heat, silently examining the tasseled buttons on her clothing with great focus. Yet another time, she fell over while reaching for something, sprawled on the ground. Looking up at her mother, she smiled tentatively but, receiving no attention, quietly got back on her feet. Because of these memories, Feng Jiang's emotions toward Yin Shueshan were conflicted. He wasn't good at hiding his feelings, so he often came across as cold and distant. Even when Yin Shueshan smiled at him, he would maintain his stern demeanor until her smile faded away. At the age of 32, Feng Jiang remained single. Within his company, speculation about his staunch anti-marriage stance ranged across psychological, physical, and even moral explanations. Yin Shueshan was curious, too. Her bright eyes made him feel exposed, as though the warmth of her gaze was a flame licking at parts of his life he preferred to keep hidden. After collaborating with his company on 2 projects, rumors began circulating about her personal connections. Some speculated that she had someone influential backing her, helping her climb from small-scale projects to large contracts. Others gossiped about her car, her upscale apartment, and her cafe, wondering where the money came from. Feng Jiang overheard these remarks and couldn't help but defend her. Anyone who's worked with Yin Shueshan knows her dedication and talent. Is it so hard to acknowledge the efforts of a young, capable woman? This statement quickly reached Yin Shueshan. One evening, after a company dinner, she bumped into Feng Jiang in the hotel hallway and asked softly, "Can I pursue you?" Feng Jiang stepped back, his expression serious. "You've had too much to drink." Standing rigidly, he walked away. Leaning against the wall, with the sounds of revelry still echoing from the banquet room, Yin Shueshan felt her heart drift, fueled by youthful fervor and determination. That year, she thought, if he loved her, she would give him everything. And if it wasn't enough, she would find more to give. But only that year. She was young, passionate, and reckless, a fleeting moment that wouldn't last forever. The more indifferent Feng Jiang acted, the more she wanted to see the real, unguarded side of him. But soon, Feng Jiang laid everything out clearly. "You know Feng Jun, don't you? He's my father." At that moment, Yin Shueshan's expression resembled that of a child suppressing deep hurt while trying to appear unaffected. She immediately erected emotional barriers, though her eyes and lips betrayed her vulnerability. Calming her racing heart, she replied with honesty, "I know a little about the older generation stories. Honestly, I like you, but I don't know you well yet. What I do know is my mother. She's someone I deeply admire and respect. If anything I've done or said made you misunderstand or look down on me, I'm sorry. That was entirely my own doing. I promise I won't bother you anymore." He stared at her, his gaze complex, which made her hesitate. He seemed to struggle to find the right words, wanting to sound kind but not ambiguous. Finally, he spoke slowly. "I never thought that. I'm actually quite happy, but it wouldn't work. You understand, don't you?" "Yes, I think you'll understand what I mean." Seeing his expression, she almost felt sorry for him. The belt she had planned to give him was tossed into the trash before she left. She thought she would quickly move on, believing herself to be above such things. In the past decade, her father had been absent, and her mother had worked hard to build a good life for them. If men who came and left scars, then she and her mother had embroidered flowers over those wounds with their bond. Wan Jimei had given her enough confidence and security. Her ideal love was pure, untainted by material needs, marriage, or family obligations. And it was precisely because of this foundation that Yin Shueshan soon came to understand Feng Jiang. A person's present was often shaped by their past. They both trusted and loved their families, yet with each other, every step felt like a misstep. Maintaining a facade of normalcy, they appeared as mere colleagues or casual friends. But beneath the surface, their care and understanding for one another quietly grew. That early autumn, when a typhoon passed through, In Shueshan encountered heavy rain while returning from a business trip. One of the windshield wipers on her car broke off. Struggling, she found a parking spot and tried to take refuge in a nearby store. But after walking only a few steps, a broken tree branch fell and knocked her unconscious. The day after In Shueshan was hospitalized, Feng Jiang came to visit with a colleague. She noticed his gaze. It was different from everyone else's. She wanted to smile at him, but found she couldn't. Life is so fragile. In an instant, you can lose someone. The fear of that complete loss, the moment when you can no longer see the person's face or hear their voice, creates an irreplaceable void that lingers for the rest of your life. Are you afraid? Yes, you should be. And that's why you should love fully. Love yourself and everything you hold dear. From that day onward, In Shueshan stayed in the hospital for a week. During that time, Feng Jiang hesitated around Wan Jimei, but ended up staying as her temporary caretaker. In the first 2 years, neither of them mentioned the other's name in front of their families. Apart from a few close friends, they never appeared together at social gatherings. Most of the time, they met outside, trying to avoid leaving traces in each other's homes. In Shueshan didn't believe that marriage would add anything valuable to her life. She didn't think spending every day together was ideal either. On the contrary, it might amplify the flaws, the petty things you usually wouldn't see, under a magnifying glass, making them impossible to avoid. She never defined a relationship with Feng Jiang, although sometimes she did feel lost and sad. Later, her senior went abroad, and the real estate market cooled. In Shueshan shrank her studio's scale while researching the market and studying customer needs. Her business wasn't booming, but it was steady. To Feng Jiang, In Shueshan was the closest thing to his ideal partner. She was confident, understanding, and capable of giving high doses of love without bitterness or jealousy. He understood that what he feared the most was the kind of intimacy he saw between his parents. And because of this, he worked hard to offer In Shueshan emotional security. The first person to notice their relationship was Wan Jimei. She quietly observed, knowing that young people's relationships could be unpredictable. But after observing for a while, she realized that these two kids had a natural, strong connection. She began to mentally prepare herself. The 8-year age gap wasn't an issue. As for the gossip from older people, well, let them talk. And as for Ai Ying was already in her middle years, and her daughter was young, smart, financially stable, and had a successful career. What was there to fear? Wan Jimei decided to put her concerns to rest and called Feng Jun to ask if he knew about it. Feng Jun paused for a moment, then laughed heartily, sounding incredibly pleased as though a heavy weight had been lifted. When Ai Ying first learned of it, she was stunned for a while. She said she couldn't understand why her husband was so entangled with this mother-daughter pair. Her words sent Feng Jun into a coughing fit. Ai Ying kept complaining about the difficult mother-daughter relationship, feeling like her whole world was falling apart. Feng Jiang finally had to tell her, with a sense of resignation, "We're not planning to get married," adding, "The key is she won't." Ai Ying was speechless, her shock evident. What? Her surprise was immense. What had happened to her son? Was he lacking in family wealth or personal qualities? The psychological contrast hit her hard, and she quickly realized, compared to watching her son grow old alone, did it really matter who he was with? She struggled internally for a moment, then cautiously asked, "Do you really like her?" Her son looked up and smiled, replying frankly, "Yes, I really like her. It's because of her that I want to get married." Ai Ying had no words left. She felt a mixture of pity, helplessness, and frustration, and slapped his head with a little force. Feng Jiang couldn't pinpoint when he started thinking about marriage, but In Shueshan remained silent on the subject. The more he got to know her, the more he couldn't ask. He feared making her sad and worried that every meeting could turn into a goodbye. But still, he felt a sense of disappointment and frustration. He would ask, "Am I not good enough?" Otherwise, you wouldn't have so many concerns. Like me, I used to be scared of everything, but now I'm not afraid of anything. He said it seriously, but In Shueshan just grinned, teasing, "You're just afraid of my mom." Indeed, that morning, Feng Jiang parked his car in front of Azure and Blue and confidently walked in with a bouquet of roses. But as soon as he saw Wang Jimei, he panicked. His foot slipped, and he ducked into the back room. He immediately regretted it, and when he realized the atmosphere between mother and daughter wasn't right, he figured he couldn't keep avoiding it. But just as he stepped out, he overheard Wang Jimei's comments about him. Embarrassed and ashamed, he plastered a smile on his face and called out, "Aunt May." Wang Jimei smiled and said, "Oh, you're here." After Feng Jiang left, Wang Jimei chuckled. "Still trying to hide? The car's parked right outside. Do you think I don't recognize the license plate?" At this, In Shueshan became genuinely angry.
Mom,
"Since you saw him, why say those things? Are you trying to embarrass me?" "Good that you're embarrassed," Wang Jimei replied without holding back. "I've wanted to say that for a long time, but you wouldn't listen if I spoke nicely at home. Since he's here today, it's better you both hear it together. If you want to be together, be open about it. You're not celebrities. Hiding it doesn't help." In Shueshan had no response. After a while, she asked, "So the whole thing with my brother borrowing money, that was just something you made up?" "That part is true," Wang Jimei said. "They were complaining in front of me. I couldn't just ignore it. How much can you lend?" In Shueshan was filled with shame, anger, frustration, and helplessness. She firmly refused. "I don't have money." In Shueshan and Feng Jiang broke up. In this relationship, it seemed there were only two options: either meet the parents and go through the motions or break up. There was no middle ground. Wang Jimei was pressuring In Shueshan, and Ai didn't sit idly by either. She would either question his masculinity, asking, "Are you even a man?" or doubt his ability, saying, "If you were good at everything, how could anyone not want to marry you?" Or dismiss his paternal traits. "You're just like your dad. Didn't you inherit anything from him?" At these moments, Feng Jun simply blinked, neither rebutting nor interrupting, as if he truly didn't have a voice, and his wife was his mouthpiece. Feng Jiang was frustrated, and In Shueshan was troubled. They both knew exactly what was going on. Wang Jimei didn't truly understand Feng Jiang, but because of the connection to his father, once she accepted the fact that her daughter loved him, she believed there could be no mistake. The same went for Feng Jun. He hadn't even met the grown-up In Shueshan, yet he was already urging marriage. In Shueshan understood her mother's intentions. Retirement marked a turning point for Wang Jimei, making her feel old. She was worried and depressed, as if she saw the end of her life approaching. She wanted to place her daughter's hand in someone else's. Ai was no different. Feng Jiang cared deeply for his mother, understanding that everyone had some unresolved emotional baggage. To accept and deal with Wang Jimei's daughter meant she had to navigate through many hidden challenges, yet Ai seemed to do so effortlessly. No matter how outdated or conservative her thoughts were, Ai simply wanted her son to have someone to love, to have a warm home. She was eager for this, and the identity of the woman didn't matter as long as her son liked her. In her mind, if her son loved this woman, she must be perfect, an angel, the right one. But now they had broken up, and quite decisively. Feng Jiang was back at his parents' house for dinner every day, while In Shueshan stayed in her mother's bed at night, not wanting to leave. As for the reason for the breakup, neither of them could really explain it. After all, one had already been declared by his mother to not have a mouth, while the other would simply rest her head on her mother's shoulder and let things slide. Less than half a month later, the three older people couldn't sit still. Ai went to Feng Jun for advice. What if we arrange for the kids to meet and express our stance? But Feng Jun thought they should talk to Wang Jimei first. Ai thought for a moment, then nodded, handing him the phone with determination. Call her now and set it up. They met at a tea house that day. After some small talk, there was a brief moment of silence before Ai couldn't hold herself back. She looked at Won Jime and asked, "Could it be because you opposed it that they broke up?" Won Jime smiled and replied, "I wish it were that simple, but I'm not that powerful. Are you?" "Me?" AI spoke quickly. "I'd love for them to get married tomorrow." Won Jime exaggerated. "Can we talk some sense? How many times have I tried to avoid arguing with you? We're both over 60 now. Don't act like an old sister-in-law." Fong Jun silently sipped his tea and interjected, "This tea is good. Aren't you going to drink it?" No one responded to him. After a while, he quietly stood up and disappeared for a bit, either to the restroom or somewhere else, and didn't return for quite some time. When he came back, Ai Ing and Won Jime were deep in conversation, discussing the two young lovers. They wondered what had gone wrong. The couple had been together for so long. Why didn't they just openly date and get married? Everyone supported them. Why the breakup? Realizing he was of little use, and perhaps even a hindrance, Fong Jun stepped outside for a smoke. When he came back, the topic had shifted entirely, and the two women were now discussing massages and manicures. He had no idea how the conversation had turned that way. That evening, after hearing about it from his parents, Fong Jiang called In Shueshan. "Little trickster, your plan worked." Yes, pretending not to be together had always been their specialty, and now pretending to have broken up had successfully drawn their parents' attention. The idea had been In Shueshan's. She had realized that her mother's attitudes towards marriage were eager yet awkward, so she decided to create an opportunity for reconciliation. Otherwise, whether they married or not, it seemed there would always be hidden conflict. The two of them laughed and exchanged the information they had heard. After a while, Fong Jiang asked, "So, shall we make up tomorrow?" "What about after we make up?" In Shueshan hesitated, asking, "Can you still resist their pressure to get married? Do you still know if we're marrying because we want to be together or just to fulfill our parents' expectations?" "I know the difference," he said steadily. "Shueshan, there are some things you've never said, but we've been together for so long. Don't worry. I'll give you everything you want, and I won't force anything on you that you don't." She fell silent for a moment before asking, "Have I ever talked in my sleep?"
He laughed.
"I'm not telling you." Early one morning, Fong Jiang received a call from Won Jime for the first time. His panic was as usual. He straightened up immediately. Won Jime asked, "Is Shueshan with you?" After receiving a negative answer, she asked again, "Do you know where she is?" When he responded with another no, Won Jime became both angry and anxious, saying, "Then why aren't you calling her? No wonder your mom says you don't know how to speak." She hung up abruptly, leaving Fong Jiang holding the phone, speechless. He called In Shueshan, but as expected, it went unanswered. A few minutes later, she called him back with a simple statement, "I decided to go out for a few days on a whim." "That excuse will work on your mom, but not on me," he said, starting to complain. "She says I don't know how to speak." In Shueshan chuckled. "Looks like they've been gossiping about you behind your back." "My mom is like that," he replied. "When she accepts someone, she opens up completely." He asked, "Where are you really?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she said, "I'm taking care of a few things. Can you help take care of the house?" "Of course," he agreed. "If you need anything, just let me know." Indeed, there was no sudden whim. In Shueshan had secretly planned this trip for a long time, having imagined it many times before, but only now finally gathering the courage. She hadn't told her mother, nor anyone else. For years, she had been haunted by an old and stifling dream. In the dream, the 10-year-old girl ran behind her father, carrying a school bag. She smiled as she tried to surprise him by jumping onto his back when he stopped, but his steps never slowed. He entered the building, and a door opened, revealing a woman in a red robe, only to be shut again. It was an old courtyard building, with a stove on one side of the hallway and damp clothes hanging on the other. The girl stood at the door. The poor soundproofing of the old house magnified the noises from the quiet weekday afternoon. The girl vaguely understood something. Her heart raced, and her face burned. She thought about calling her mother, but hesitated. She went back to the door, yanked the wet clothes to the ground, grabbed a frying spatula from the stove and threw it on the floor, then ran away. In the dream, she could never finish running. She couldn't scream, couldn't find her way home, always ending up back in front of the door. Sometimes a red robe would cover her head, making it hard for her to breathe. Other times, her father would suddenly burst out and slap her. She felt fear, pain, and shame. She had never been able to resolve it, nor could she share it with anyone. In Shueshan stayed away for over 10 days. Every day, Feng Jiang contacted her, worried and caring. He wasn't someone who didn't know how to speak. He talked to her a lot, offering support. Wang Jimei kept asking when she'd return, concerned whether she was angry or upset. In Shueshan would reassure her, "Mom, I won't put any pressure on you anymore. No more pushing for marriage or kids, and no more asking for money, I promise." In Shueshan couldn't help but laugh. "I knew it. First you push for marriage, then kids, see? You admitted it." Wang Jimei laughed too. "You're heartless. As soon as you're unhappy, you just run off. Fine, I won't bother you anymore." But just after saying she wouldn't bother, she couldn't help but add, "Shueshan, if you want something, go after it bravely. If you don't want it, let it go without regret. We have to be responsible for ourselves and for each other. And no matter what choice you make, we're capable of handling what comes next, understand?" This time, In Shueshan answered obediently, "I understand, Mom." A few days later, just like when she had left quietly, In Shueshan returned just as quietly. She felt exhausted, as though she had just completed something mentally demanding. Dropping her luggage and quickly washing up, she collapsed onto the bed. She was sleeping soundly when she vaguely heard someone speaking in her dream, followed by footsteps approaching the bedroom. After being away for so long, it felt as though she were still in the hotel. She jumped up in fright, almost bumping into the face that was bending over to look at her. She froze and exclaimed, "Feng Jiang, you nearly gave me a heart attack. What are you doing?" His gaze was gentle and clear. He smiled, showing a little bit of his teeth, and reached out to tousle her messy hair, exaggeratedly saying, "There's a water leak in the bathroom. You didn't pick up your phone, and if I hadn't come, the neighbors downstairs would have been flooded by now." In Shueshan snapped out of it and looked at him. A flood of emotions rushed over her, and she remembered hearing sounds like scraping tiles and imagined a scene of broken tiles and water flooding the floor. She closed her eyes and lay back down, choosing to ignore it. "Please close the door when you leave." He responded, but stayed by the bed, not wanting to leave. She had only said a simple sentence, yet it seemed like he heard, "I love you," in it. In Shueshan didn't need to open her eyes to know the look on his face, so she grabbed the blanket and covered her head. Feng Jiang deliberately clapped his hands loudly, signaling that he was ready to pull her out of the blanket. They both tried to stifle their laughter, and after a moment of playful tug-of-war with the blanket, he finally covered her properly, hugging her through the blanket like holding a stuffed bear. He got up and left after a while. In Shueshan uncovered her face and looked at the closed door, her heart soft and wistful.
She wanted to talk to him.
She wanted to tell him that she had gone to see her father, In Jianghe. She had stayed at a hotel near his place, watching him go out for walks and buy groceries. Sometimes he was alone, sometimes with his wife. He wasn't working anymore, and his financial situation seemed average, but his life was steady and peaceful. One day, gathering her courage, she saw him face to face. Her father seemed to recognize her, but also looked as if he didn't, walking past her, and then turning back to look at her. He even smiled at her. At that moment, In Shueshan started crying. She walked among strangers, sobbing like a child. She felt like something inside her had been let go. In the past, she had always been too afraid to confront or explore her feelings of resentment, expectation, and guilt towards her father. She was afraid he wasn't doing well because he was her father, and when she was little, they had some warm memories together. But deep down, she also didn't want him to be too well, as if that would mean the world was unfair. Now, she understood that good and bad often intertwine, and she accepted that people have their own paths in life. At this moment, she wanted to tell Feng Jiang that she wanted to walk the same path as him, not to please or accommodate anyone, but because it was what she truly desired and accepted. Just like when she was young and innocent, two people, each with their own backpack, went out and happened to meet each other, and then happily greeted each other. "Hey, what a coincidence. Are you going there too?" She wanted to tell him, but she still felt a little shy, waiting for that door to open again. She knew soon enough he would come,